Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. Episode 151. The Metal Exchange goes gothic this week as we cover Type O Negative's 1996 release, October Rust. But before we get there, how are you, my friend?
151 reminds me of some poor decisions made in college involving Bacardi.
Well fitting, because I think that this album is one of the bleakest things that we've covered for various reasons, but certainly different from everything else we've done in many ways. So I'm looking forward to this a lot. I hope it wasn't too rough of a week for you. But before we get there, anything that you listened to that kind of jump out at you? I know that we talked offline about some stuff and some exciting times ahead for sure.
Yeah, I was happy to hear that Voyager is releasing a full-length album, which is kind of a long time coming. Their last one came out in 2019, Colors in the Sun. I think we've actually talked about this not too long ago, that they've been releasing a lot of singles, but there hasn't been a full-length album, and it looks like that is going to come to fruition. The album's going to be called Fearless in Love, and I'm going to quickly just look up the exact date that it comes out so that I can do it justice. But they released a new single just this week in advance of this album called Prince of Fire, and I have to say, album comes out July 14th, so it'll be here before you know it. Voyager has really just mastered the art of high production values. Like I'm listening to this new song right now, and it sounds so clear and so crisp, and every instrument just shines through. They're just a very technically impressive band, and some of the other singles that they've released over the course of the last year or two, Dreamer, Submarine, and Promise, are all going to be on this album as well. So four of the tracks, I believe there will be 11 tracks. So 4 of the 11 tracks are already available to listen to. And then there's also a couple of singles that they released, cover songs of This Boy's in Love and Break a Broken Heart, which are not going to be on the album, but you can grab those from iTunes or Spotify or whatever. But I have a feeling that this band's gonna, if they haven't already, they're gonna break through, much the same way that Sleep Token has recently. I heard their last show was a real gas, but I don't know. Like I've always had a feeling about these guys and gal, and it looks like they're finally getting the attention they deserve.
I think that being on Eurovision now for, I guess, the second time has really kind of catapulted them in many ways. And they've always been a band that's accessible, just not well known. But I think that now that we're, with COVID in the rearview mirror and them hitting the ground with the European tour and the Eurovision thing, this might be the thing that really just kind of pushes them into the stratosphere, which they obviously deserve. We had Danny on the show a number of months ago, or probably over a year ago now. Just really, really catchy stuff that anyone could listen to, whether they're a prog guy, a metal guy, or even just a fan of like 80s, Depeche Mode, like a little something for everyone here.
I thought you were going to say whether you're a power guy, a prog guy, or just a guy.
That too.
Spoiler alert, this will not be the last time Voyager is mentioned on this episode, I can assure you.
Yes, I think that's...
But I have to say, like, I was with you when they were announced for Prog Power the first time, and I remember how excited you were, and I wasn't familiar with them, and you were like, just wait. And at the time, I believe they only had 3 albums, and then by the time they played live, The Meaning of I was going to come out about a week after. I think I even played 2 songs from the album, and I remember they were they sold the album a little bit early at Prog Power, and they were also tossing copies of it into the crowd. That also happened to be drummer Ashley Dudecourt's second ever performance with the band, and the lineup has stayed the same since that right around that time. They played their first show in Brooklyn, which you were there for, and then as their current lineup, and they've been together ever since. It's a really just well-oiled machine at this point.
Yeah,
so.
I think we're due to cover another one of their albums. It's been a while, but I only put that out there because I feel like there's never a bad time for a Voyager album. But yeah, best of luck to them. I look forward to hearing the new album. And speaking of things I'm looking forward to, a single dropped by a band called Sacred Outcry. And I have
vocals sounded very familiar.
The vocals sounded familiar, but quite frankly, the whole thing sounded oddly like a band we did a career retrospective on not so long ago. Daniel Hyman sings on this track, and this is about the closest thing I've heard to Lost Horizon in 20 years. Not just because of the vocals, but just because of the stylings of the music. This has definite potential. And even though I've kind of moved away from power metal in many regards, if they do it right, I still love it. And this was done right. And I kind of look forward to this album as being something that could be a real masterpiece. The single that came out was called, ironically enough, The Voyage. You would think there's a common theme here, but no, I assure you that just happens to be the name of the song, The Voyage. And it's taken from the album Towers of Gold, which comes out on May 19th. So we're getting real close to this thing being released. I am very excited.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Daniel Hyman on it makes it just a blind buy just from the get-go. But this single is definitely, like you said, like this is... it bodes well for the rest of the album if it sticks in this direction, because this is awesome. And it's like, for me, hearing Hyman is like when you hear Kiss. Like, it's always just a joy, no matter what it is. If it's just regular old rock or metal or power metal or prog metal or whatever, like it's always always a joy to hear his vocals, especially because you don't really get to hear them that often. So this is going to be cool. I'm excited for this, and I look forward to the release, which is, like you said, only a couple weeks away.
You talk about a guy who could sing a phone book, and I'd be interested in hearing it. Like, he's one of those guys for sure. So I have a feeling it'll be better than a phone book. So we got that going for us. And the other album I wanted to mention was a band that's getting quite a bit of, like, I've seen it in a number of places. And I guess by that, I mean, it's like an underground band that nobody really talks about, but this particular release seems to be picking up some steam. The name of the album is called Dreams of Lands Unseen. The band is called Ignia, and they're from Ukraine, and they have a female vocalist, and it's very much in the vein of almost like an Amorphous type of sound with some like Eastern European flair to it, almost like a Mirath with the Tunisian flavor to it, but this is more of an Eastern European sound. An interesting album. I have to give it some more time. I definitely liked it after the first listen. I will absolutely post a track or two this week from the album just because I think it's worth listening to. I don't know that anything jumped out at me in particular. I just thought the album was a good listen.
Yeah, I snagged the one of the singles called Opiumist on your recommendation, and I liked it a lot. It's going to be on one of my upcoming playlists, along with the Sacred Outcry song as well, and the new Voyager single. So pretty much everything we've talked about so far will be represented. But yeah, this sounds really cool. It's got a lot of different elements, like you said. There's symphonic, there's progressive, there's folk, there's Middle Eastern. It's really interesting stuff. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear the rest of the album, but the one song that I did listen to was quite good.
Nice. And then we get to the business at hand, if you will. Typo Negative's October Rust album, which came out August 20th, 1996. So we're almost 30 years to the day, which just is crazy to say, but we're almost 30 years to the from when this album was released. Before we get into the band and some of the details, I have to think this was probably one of, if not your first exposure to the band. Like I can't imagine you just sitting there listening to this without me forcing you to.
I did not realize like what this is going to be interesting how to verbalize. I always assumed that Typo Negative sounded completely different than what they ended up sounding like. And it was really just a preconceived notion based on absolutely nothing. Like literally just basing it off the name of the band.
Well, what did you think they sounded like?
I thought that they were like a much heavier,
like death metal type of thing?
Not death metal. I didn't think they were death metal, but I just thought they were just like really heavy metal. And this was not at all what I was expecting, but I actually kind of liked it. I'm going to be honest with you. Like it grew on me, and there was the things that it reminded me of were all over the place. But the only song that I really had by them was a song that was on one of the playlists that you made a while ago. Let's see how long ago that playlist was from. That was from 2013.
Wow.
Your December 2013 playlist. I don't know if you remember what song it was. Maybe we'll see if you can remember. But
I have no recollection whatsoever.
Okay, cool. So, well, I'll bring it up when we get to it. But I was really surprised. It was like even just from the very beginning, I was like, oh, okay, like this is interesting. I always wondered why bands held this band in such high regard, and now I kind of understand it.
Yeah,
tell me about your like history of knowing them and where you first heard them, and I'm curious to know.
Okay, well, it's funny that you mention it. I actually remember the first day that I heard them, but it's for reasons that you wouldn't otherwise expect. I'll kind of paint the picture. It was September 1st, 1999, and the only reason that sticks out was because I went to go see a Megadeth concert, and they were playing the Roseland Ballroom. And shout out to Mike, I dragged him to go see I didn't drag him to go see Megadeth, but he went with me to go see Megadeth in New York City. And unbeknownst to me, and this is like kind of the formative days of the internet, so getting news was a little bit, fewer and further between, I guess, at this point. So when we go see them, it turns out that this was like a bit of a festival, if you will, in the sense that it was a benefit show for an organization called the Concrete Foundation. And other bands were playing with Megadeth that night. I forget exactly who they were. I can easily look them up, but I do vividly remember the band that went on directly before Megadeth back in 1999, and it was Typo Negative. So my first exposure to the band, my only exposure to the band for many years, was in a live show, actually seeing them in concert. And I think my palate was a little more limited back then, so it's not that I didn't like it. I just didn't know what I was listening to, and I just didn't appreciate it as much as I think I probably could have or should have, because they actually played a few songs from this album. So that was my first exposure to some of this stuff. But I at the time, I didn't listen to harsh vocals. I didn't listen to vocals that were, Peter Steele. It was just not in my wheelhouse at the time, where in retrospect, I think if I would have gone to see them 10 years later, I think I would have been really into it, because I could have seen myself really enjoying it. But at the time, it was just kind of, let's get on and let's get Megadeth on stage. And then ultimately, after Megadeth would go off the stage, Bruce Dickinson would join Megadeth on stage with Tony Iommi for some Black Sabbath hits. So it was a wild night, and a night I'll never forget. But to make a very long story short, that's how I first heard the band live, opening for Megadeth.
Well, I'm actually looking at the set list, and 4 of the 6 songs they played were from this album, October Rust. And one of the 6 was a cover of the Beatles back in the USSR of all things. So that's interesting. Would you like to know the other 3 bands that played that night?
One of them was Puya. Is that, if memory serves?
Yep. And along with DDT, Jake the Snake Roberts' favorite band, and Full Devil Jacket.
Well, I think I went in late, because the only thing I remember is, and I think I did that on purpose because I just had no interest in the other bands. I think I actually wound up walking in, but I did catch all of Typo's set, so it was interesting, to say the least. It was a good night.
That's cool. I mean, especially now knowing that Peter Steele's no longer with us. That's pretty awesome that you that got to see them while they were still around. So very nice.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that most people would agree this was their, I don't want to say their best album, but arguably their best album at the very least. And even in their live sets, before Peter Steele passed, they would always play songs from this album, usually more songs from this album than any other. So that being said, I just think it's I wanted to pay a tribute. I wanted to listen to it in its entirety because it's something I've done from time to time, but I hadn't done a deep dive into it in some time. And I was really curious about your thoughts because I understand why you thought what they weren't. I understand the kind of the allure of the band, thinking that it was heavier than they were. But at the same time, it's funny because when I listen to this, I'd argue they aren't even a metal band. I would argue that they're kind of like either a bizarre alt-rock band or kind of like a goth rock band, but they're not really a metal band. And that's despite Peter Steele's upbringing, if you will, where he cut his teeth in Carnivore, which was a thrash band. But this is not really that. And in many ways, you can kind of see why they had at least some mainstream appeal because there's a lot of elements of like the 80s electronic stuff and, bands like Depeche Mode, who I mentioned earlier. They draw upon a lot of influences, but it's not completely inaccessible to the masses.
I couldn't have said that better myself. That was very well done.
Thank you.
I absolutely agree. Like, it was really interesting to just kind of delve into this and just like, again, this happens a lot to me with this podcast where I'm like 25 years late on something, if not much longer, in the case of some other things we've talked about. But much like, when we talked about, Fear Factory and some of these more mainstream type of bands, mainstream metal bands from the 90s that just went right over my head. This was, again, another one of them. And now that now that I've listened to it, it's like clear to me that this band influenced a lot of bands that we listened to. And like I mentioned earlier about, that we were going to mention Voyager again, especially early Voyager, that just I think that the pianos and the keyboards on this album really make me think of that Voyager had some influence or that this pulled some influence to Voyager's early sound because there's definitely some similarities there, but it really is this interesting marriage of like this really gothy down-tuned guitars, but with like these 80s new wave style piano and keyboard sounds, and then like these really unique vocals. It's a really, really unique overall sound that I didn't think I was going to like based on the first listen, and I ended up enjoying it quite a bit, actually.
And let's not forget, you brought up Voyager. They actually had a song on The Meaning of I called Iron Dream, which was a Peter Steele tribute. So I don't think it's any surprise that Voyager is really just like a happier version, if typo negative, at least in those early days. Now they've kind of evolved in many ways, but definitely early on, they were hugely influenced by Voyager. I'm sorry, by typo. And I think Danny Estrin would be the first one to admit that his early sound, I mean, he was just a huge fan of this band, and it translated both on his keyboard or his guitar, and a lot of even the riffs in many ways that drew influence from this stuff.
I actually did a little bit of probably more research on this than I would typically do because I was really interested in the history of the band, where this album kind of fits in the whole, big picture, what some of the songs, the meaning of some of these songs, because like the lyrics are very interesting as we make our way through. But, I read that this is considered their least doomy album with the most ballads and, maybe the most melodic or progressive of their albums, and that I can't speak to, but there's definitely a prog element that's underlaying throughout this entire proceeding. In my opinion, it's they're really, like I said, just seems like there's a lot of different influences all kind of coming together to make this really unique type of sound.
And going forward, and you alluded to this earlier, I think that I'll say it this way. I'm going to draw a lot of comparisons to bands that would come later on many of these songs and before, or contemporaries, if you will. But there's a lot of things that I'm going to reference that, to me, this was like, oh my gosh, I've heard this before, or I've heard this later on by somebody else, because there was clearly influences drawn. And I'm curious to see if those sounds that I picked up from other bands, which I will mention, if you heard the same thing or if you heard different things, because I have a feeling that if it's something that we both heard, there's probably a really, really good reason for that.
Sure. Yeah, I would have to agree.
And so to that point, because it was really like unlike anything we've covered, I thought it would make for an interesting chat. That being said, I do have one large complaint which I'll make, but I don't think it's best fit here. I'll save it for the right time. But before we get into the album itself, Peter Steele obviously on lead vocals. He also was the bass player on this, which I think is a big part of their sound for many reasons. Kenny Hickey on backing vocals and guitars. Josh Silver also doing all those keyboard and synthesizer and program sounds, which is a real big piece of this as well. And Johnny Kelly, who gets credited with the drums, which were really programmed on this album, but he is their full-time drummer going forward. But we have a little bit of a shadow gallery situation here where, Ben Timely is the drummer on this thing.
I didn't think we were going to have him on the podcast again, but sure enough,
welcome
he's back,
Ben.
And, I guess the timing was right. I don't know, something stupid. Insert stupid comment here.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so the other thing I'll say about this, a very meaty album. This album clocks in at 72 minutes. So this is not something that.
And there's some pretty long tunes on here too.
Oh yeah, and it's just, and the way it's constructed is fascinating. I mean, the album starts out with a track called "Bad Ground," which is actually a pretty funny name given what the track is, because it's basically a wire that sounds like it's not connected to the board, and it just has that buzzing sound for 38 seconds. It's unlike anything I've ever heard to start an album.
Speaking of our friend Mike, who you just mentioned, he loves a good prank video on Instagram, and this is pretty much what that is, because it's 38 seconds of nonsense followed by the band laughing at you. Right,
that in track number 2, although it has no title, it's literally the band sending their regards, and it almost reminded me of like a promo CD where it's like, we haven't started yet, but take a listen to what we got, because the first real track here is "Love You to Death," which is the third track, and a very long song in that it comes in at 7 minutes, but one of their biggest songs in their catalog, and a song that they would often, if not always, play live. What did you think of this? Because this was kind of like your first real exposure to them.
It's funny. This was the song that just stuck with me the most out of all of them, and it's going to be my song of the week right off the bat.
Right out of the chute.
Yeah, right out of the chute. I think I've only ever done this one other time, or the first full-length song. I guess it's technically not the first track, because there's 2 tracks of goofiness to begin, but I just really, really liked the song, and I thought the fact that it was like, over 7 minutes long was going to make it feel kind of long in the tooth. But it's really, I'm going to probably use the words hauntingly beautiful a lot during this podcast. And this is, to me, like really just just such an unbelievable combination of things that I think really speaks to, like, at least to me, what this band is all about. It's like what I'd call a dark ballad, I guess would be kind of an interesting way of putting it. Cause like, it's not like your typical power ballad love song type of thing that you get from like, your 80s hair bands or your 90s power metal bands. Like it's a dark sounding song. Interestingly enough, a description I saw online, said that it musically contains a mixture of Cocteau Twins and the Beatles, on top with gothic sounds, haunted piano, and atmospheric sound effects that make them ooze the loss and lounge, which I thought was interesting. And to put it simply, the song is about psychotic love.
I mean, who can say it better than that? Let's give it a listen. We'll come back and I'll share some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time picking a minute from this, but here it is. Love You to Death.
So this is fascinating on a number of levels for me. Number one, you picked a song that was, like you said, it was over 7 minutes long. It's the second single on the album, which I think is fitting. And I'll say this, it was a candidate for me as well. I think this is just an absolutely beautiful track. What was kind of unique about it is that you could kind of tell, at least for the most part, which songs were like their biggest hits off the album, because they were just a touch less dark than the others. There was almost like a shade of light in this gloomy darkness. So this being one of them, dark and gothic, very, very prominent keyboards, but slightly more upbeat than the rest of it. And there's just an infectious melody. I hear a touch of Moonspell, the band, on this. And obviously the vocals remind me a touch of like a Glenn Danzig or something like that, just somehow deeper and darker.
There's a part of me that feels like there's almost, and this just hit me, so I apologize for interrupting, but it's almost like this modern day Pink Floyd, or not really too modern, it's almost 20 years ago, but at the time, like almost like a modern day Pink Floyd, but then mixed with kind of like this Depeche Mode-y 80s new wave. There's just enough melody in there for it to not be like a complete downer.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because you had mentioned kind of in the intro how there was like the Beatles sound or whatever. Well, I found this to be really interesting. They actually had the nickname the Drab Four instead of the Fab Four. And I think it's fitting as well. This is a great track. I can't say enough about it. And a great way to start the album. And then it goes into this other, like, almost a song that almost has like a jazzy feel at first. And it's short-lived, but it's called Be My Druidess. It has this like groovy little bass solo that starts the song. And then the main riff is like really, really catchy. And so are the verses. This song, maybe more than any other, screams Voyager to me. Like, I just hear so much Voyager in this track. A knock, I guess, would be that the choruses on this particular track are a bit repetitive, but they're not bad. And there's like these haunting samples throughout that almost give it like a Twilight Zone feel. I love this song. I think it's a really good song and probably not talked about enough in the pantheon of their, greatest hits or what have you.
Yeah, it's an interesting song because, again, I feel like it kind of starts out with this 80s Gary Newman-esque kind of like new wavy, synthy kind of like intro, but then it goes into like this chorus that's just like really creepy and dark, and then the fact that with the lyrics literally are "I'd do anything to make you come." It's so freaking, the way he sings it is so creepy. Like this song has restraining order written all over it, but the way it was described on this webpage that I'm looking at made me laugh, because it just says the song is about finding a perfect mate in the forest.
I mean, what more could be said? I just want to ask you one question, and that's, did you find the vocals jarring because they're so low, or was it just like fitting because everything else is dreary and dark?
I didn't really think one way or the other about it. It fit it fit the album. It fit the type of music. I feel like it really was like right for its time. 1996. It's like that Mortal Kombat movie soundtrack, which I believe they were on.
Yep.
That kind of like, synthy, techno-y, like Euro. This band has a very Euro style for a band that's
from
not
Brooklyn.
From Europe. Yeah, exactly. Like the little intro at the beginning where they're speaking is hilarious, because like one or two of the guys clearly is from Brooklyn. Like you couldn't mistake it for, anything in the world. Peter Steele sounds like he's from Germany. Sometimes like in his singing, it really has like a European kind of vibe to it. But I thought that like it didn't take me out of it, because I just felt like that's the kind of vocals something like this should have. Right.
I agree. It would be really weird if Michael Kiske was singing on top of these songs. It would just not fit. We get
Deris,
to
maybe.
Deris, maybe, but not Michael Kiske. We get to Green Man, and this song, I listened to it so many times because every time I listened to it, it reminded me of something. Not the acoustic guitar in the beginning, not the bass guitar in the beginning, not how it picks up. But this was a song that in many ways surprised me that it wasn't like a bigger hit. And I use that term relatively, but it wasn't one of the singles. But every time I heard the bridge and the last couple of minutes of this song, I'm like, it reminds me of something. It reminds me of something. And eventually I put the pieces together. But it reminds me, and I'm sure I'm the only person in the planet that's making this comparison, so I want to be clear, but it reminds me of Stranger by the Minute, which is a Porcupine Tree song off their Stupid Dream album, which came out 3 years later. And it almost makes me wonder, or maybe it's not 3 years later, but it was, mid to late 90s. I almost wonder if Steven Wilson was listening to this Typo Negative song and then just took the liberties of borrowing it, thinking that nobody would put two and two together. But it's like the same thing.
But then 27 years later,
I cracked the code.
On the case.
That's right. Thoughts on Green Man? I like this song.
I probably should have mentioned that I did like the previous song, "Be My Druidess." I don't think I ever actually said whether or not I like the song or not. It was actually one of my favorite songs on the album. Actually, I thought that that like dark kind of chorus thing was a little bit like overly creepy, but the rest of the song was good. And again, like there's just enough of the melodies and hooks that really keep me interested. Green Man also like has kind of like this haunting piano kind of leading the way here. It's again like has a really like that real mid-tempo 80s new wave kind of vibe, but like with these these grungy guitars over it. It's such an interesting combo. It's such and what a cool story as to what this song is about, because if you listen to it, there's an intro part of the track where you hear these sounds of a garbage man dumping garbage into a garbage truck, and this garbage truck was once driven by Peter Steele. And the name of the song is because he would wear a green jumpsuit when he worked as a park maintenance man. So like that,
at 6'8", mind you. I mean, you want to talk about an intimidating presence in the park.
Yeah, like take the garbage, please. Just leave me alone. And the song is about his love of nature, having 4 seasons, as well as rebirth, renaissance, and spirits of the forest. So I thought that was really cool. Again, like I could tell just from my limited listening that a lot of these lyrics had some strong meaning, and that's why I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit more, because I feel like sometimes we kind of don't delve too much into lyrical content, but I feel like this album kind of deserves to have it discussed. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. But another really kind of cool tune. Very, I don't know that I would call anything up until this point fast paced. I feel like everything has pretty much been mid tempo at best.
At best, and I don't think we're getting into the galloping territory at any point. There's no Metal Exchange gallop on this one.
This is a gallop free episode.
And Red Water, Christmas Morning, no different. But again, we talk about kind of the influences here or certain things that jump out at you. The way this song starts gives me a strong Tool vibe, who we also covered in the archives, but I hear a bit of Tool at the beginning, kind of slow, droning, but with those keyboards that just add a lot of feeling to the track. I have to admit, though, overall, this track was a bit of a miss for me. I thought it went on a little bit too long without anything kind of breaking it up. It was the first track on the album where I said, not my favorite. But what was interesting, I thought, was that there were parts of this song that reminded me of Soundgarden as well. So here you have a track that you blend Tool and Soundgarden and you get Red Water. I don't know. Just not really sure why it reminded me of Soundgarden. Maybe it was just the way the melody was constructed, but this track was a bit of a miss for me.
Yeah, I kind of dig this song, actually. It's like, I think it's the darkest of the first 4 songs, which I think that says something. And if you kind of look at what the song was about, you can kind of understand why. The song is about Pete Steele's father dying on Christmas morning, as well as 3 other of his family members since the previous Christmas. So the verse deals with the grief, while the chorus deals with how to cope with the pain from his personal standpoint. And the song was written to cope with his pain for the loss of his family members. And the Red Water refers to red wine, which Peter Steele was known for. I read, there's another interesting thing I read, that he actually had stage fright, and so he would drink red wine on stage to kind of keep his courage up,
calm the nerves, if you will.
Yeah, which he was in good company, because I believe Ronnie James Dio also liked his red wine. At least before a show, from what I've heard stories from Chris Jericho and others, that it's always an honor to be bestowed a glass of red wine from the great Ronnie James Dio. You never say no. It's kind of like when Lemmy offers you a cigarette, even if you don't smoke, you just take it.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very interesting. But you like this track, even though it was a little.
Yeah, I think I liked it more than you did. Especially the way that they put in like these really, really dark versions of like Carol of the Bells and God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Like kind of, it's like
the anti-TSO.
Or it's like TSO goes sad or whatever, sad TSO, which I thought really added to the whole experience of like what this song is about and what it represents. I don't know that it's probably I don't know if I'd call it my least favorite of the first 4 songs. I think I liked them all pretty equally, with that first one really kind of being my favorite. But I thought this was really interesting. And again, like, it's something that like, if you told like 15 years ago me that this was something I would have enjoyed, I would have been like, that's crazy. But I guess, your palette expands, I guess, as you get older, because I don't know, it's dark and it's creepy and it's sad and it's haunting, but I like it. Yeah,
listen, I can appreciate that. I really enjoy the next track, which was the first single from the album. It's called My Girlfriend's Girlfriend. Ironically, it's one of the shortest, if not the shortest, full-length track here, so it makes for a good single. Just really awesome keyboards, really awesome drums for what they are, being patched in, and just a top-notch tune all around with like kind of an industrial feel, and you can see why this song was so popular. Really made, I think, in many ways by the commanding vocals of Peter Steele on this particular song. It's not my song of the week, but it easily could have been, just because it's probably the most accessible song on the album and one that I do enjoy.
Also, go out of your way to find a picture of the artwork for the single is brilliant. It's Peter Steele and two women. it's a very cool looking cover art. But
yeah.
It was interesting because I was like, why does this song remind me of the Monkees? I thought to myself, and sure enough, it turns out that this song was meant to have like 1960s style of psychedelic rock and features an organ, and I guess like our discussion about the Moog synthesizer back when we were talking about the Monkees kind of reminded me of that, just in a very small, like sideway sort of way, like just, but it definitely gave off a 60s kind of rock vibe, and I guess I wasn't crazy because that's kind of what I read, and simply enough, it's not really that complicated. It's a song about having a girlfriend that has a girlfriend.
I mean, sometimes the title does give it away, and this is one of those cases. And I think another one would be a song called Die With Me, because that's our next track. And quite frankly, it certainly gives off that energy. What are your thoughts on this one? Because this is a little bit different than a lot of the tracks on here for various reasons, including the acoustic guitar, the straight up ballad type nature that I think kind of resonates with some of this thing. What are your thoughts on Die With Me?
An artist that we have not brought up yet, which I'm kind of surprised that we haven't, but who this song reminded me of, Devin Townsend.
Completely agree. I literally have it in my notes.
Definitely, I got a Devin Townsend vibe from this. I would be very, very surprised if Devin Townsend didn't get some influence from Typo Negative, because there is some of that definitely in here. This is like another really... For me to say this is a dark song on a dark album, it's got to be pretty dark. And one of the descriptions I saw as far as a genre was gothic pop for this band, which I thought was interesting. But this song in particular, I think, is one of the doomier songs on the album. But definitely a Devin vibe, and I'm glad to hear that you thought the same.
I definitely thought the same. I thought it jumped out at me, and it was real clear. Like, this just screamed Devin Townsend. But I got to be honest, when I first heard it, I wasn't thrilled with this track. But every time I listened to it, I liked it more and more. And by the end, I think it might be my favorite track on the album, and it's going to be my song of the week for that reason. I give it this one gets 2 thumbs up after about 8 listens. This one grew on me a lot. So let's die together. Let's die with me, and let's give it a listen. So in many ways, I think that they could have cut the album here and had like almost a perfect release. Not perfect, but like a really good release. As I mentioned earlier, this is a really long album in many ways, and I don't want to say that it was hard to digest the whole thing at one time, but I found myself enjoying it more when I stopped the album after Die With Me, did something else, and then went back to it an hour later and picked up with Burnt Flowers Fallen. Don't ask me why, but I felt it just easier to digest this in two pieces, because the one or two times where I listened to it straight through, by this point in the album, I had a hard time kind of keeping with it because of, I don't know, just maybe I was in too good of a mood and it was depressing me. I don't know. But this is where the album kind of takes a little bit of a turn, unless you just start here, because I actually like the main riff on this song, and it has this just cool ambiance. It just lasts too long, and I thought that this particular track was really, really repetitive, albeit with great bass lines throughout. And I think the instrumental sections help a little bit, but not enough that this track was a kind of a miss, and especially missed when I listened to it in conjunction with everything else. I liked it more when I kind of started the album here, if that makes sense.
I also felt that there was like a fatigue factor towards the end. Again, like you said, it's a pretty beefy album, and it is mostly, I think, it's got a pretty standard sound to it all the way through. So like, I could understand that after maybe 50 or 60 minutes, you've kind of reached you've had your fill of this type of music, but yet it continues on. And then the fact that, like, one of the last full length song is 10 minutes long. So like it really,
I'll get there, because to me, they should have just cut that off the album completely, and this would be a much better album, but I'll get to that at the end.
Yeah. Well, the song we're talking about now, I don't think you mentioned the name, is called Burnt Flowers Fallen. I think that it's like not quite as, it's like this in the same similar style as some of the songs we've heard already, but just not quite as, doesn't have as much of a punch.
Right.
And maybe it's just because they've already done it in a slightly better version earlier on. I think it's a solid tune, but I think I'm kind of in agreement with you that like we're kind of reaching the a little bit of the exhaustion point, I think. Depending on, like, what kind of mood you're in or what you're doing, or if you're taking a break. Interesting, lyrics. Again, the previous track, Die With Me, was about a long distance relationship and expressing a desire to die with your partner in order to be with them, because apparently that would be better than being separated by distance. And then this song, Burnt Flowers Fallen, is also about a girlfriend. In this case, it is about Peter Steele's deranged girlfriend burning all of her flowers that he gave to her. So
there you have it.
I mean, it feels like every song really has some sort of personal touch to it.
Which I think adds to the allure or the connection that a lot of fans, I'm sure, have with the album, especially when they know what these songs are about. One of the most surprising things to me was track number 10, In Praise of Bacchus. I was shocked to find out that this was the third single from the album. Like, that just surprised me completely. At first, I thought this was going to be another miss when I first heard this track, but as the week went on, I found myself liking it more and more. Another song with a strong Soundgarden vibe, but I thought this one was better than the last one that I had mentioned. I thought the backing vocals actually provided a really nice touch. And it has a bit of an epic feel to it, and it just grew on me more than some of the other tracks. I thought the production was a touch muddy on this track, but it still didn't bother me or take away from my enjoyment by the end of the week.
I think that was the point, because it really feels like a sludgy, doomy, like kind of like, just that kind of like song. It's again like I thought it was a solid tune, but it doesn't reach the heights of everything that we received up until Die With Me. And again, I think it's a little bit of a combination of like fatigue factor, but also maybe it's just not quite as memorable as some of those earlier tracks. And again, keeping up with the positive girlfriend vibes, this is a song reflecting on Peter Steele reflecting on his girlfriend hating him so much that she wanted him to be burned.
What else can you say? And as you sit back and listen to this thing, as we get towards the back end of the album, you know, I was saying to myself, the one thing this album is missing is like a Neil Young cover. And then, oh wait, there's Cinnamon Girl. There it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so random. Have you ever heard the original version of this?
Never, but this was the song that was on your playlist that I mentioned earlier. First of all, I'd like to know. I'm gonna have to look up what the hell a Cinnamon Girl even is. But I didn't know Neil Young had a song called Cinnamon Girl. I've never heard it before. I can easily say that the Typo Negative version I've heard before the original one. Okay, so the song is about the dream of meeting a girl of cinnamon-colored hair. I guess that's
who hasn't had that,
gets,
right?
Huh?
Yeah, listen. I mean, obviously, if it worked for Neil Young in 1969, why not? I mean, when in Rome, this was a really cool track. The way that starts with the drum intros actually reminds me of "Spreading the Disease" by Queensryche, which I thought was another parallel that I'm sure nobody has ever made, but I'll do it. Although the song itself obviously sounds nothing like it, but really cool riff. Really great bass lines, and it's easy to tell why they, chose this as a cover. The vocals remind me of a mix between like Glenn Danzig and that guy Michael Paulson from Volbeat. Like I hear it loud and clear on this, and I just thought it was great. Just a groovy tune, another song that could easily be the song of the week, but I obviously went in a different direction.
Thank you for mentioning Volbeat. That's what I was hearing. I was trying to figure out all week what the hell the vocals on this song reminded me of. Certainly wasn't Neil Young. But yes, that Volbeat makes complete sense. Cool song, though. I feel like it also, I would venture to say it's the most upbeat sounding song on the album. Probably because someone else wrote it.
Yeah.
But kind of a cool tune. This, I think, falls more under what I mentioned earlier, what would be described as gothic pop.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and obviously the cover didn't hurt. And then we get into the real back end of this album, and this is where you want to talk about a song title. Let me just get a sip of water before I even attempt to read this. Hold on.
I know, eat your heart out, Fall Out Boy.
All right, track 12, The Glorious Liberation of the People's Technocratic Republic of Vinland by the combined forces of the United Territories of Europa. All that for a track that's 1 minute and 7 seconds long. Really just a little interlude done in the style of Typo Negative. Strong Devin Townsend vibes on this one as well. Really cool sound effects and stuff like that. But really it's just an intro to another track, which is called Wolf Moon, including the zoothampic Paranoia. Easy for me to say. Why don't you talk about it? Because I'm trying to get my tongue off the floor.
I know you did so well on that previous track, and then you
botched it.
You let Zoanthropic throw you off.
I did.
There's a really like atmospheric kind of sound to this song. It's almost the word is escaping me. But yeah, atmospheric, I think, is the best I'm going to do at this point. But I thought this was a cool song. It's probably one of the songs I liked the most on the second half of the album. Again, like it kind of goes back to that kind of sludgy, like doomy kind of sound. But I really like the chorus on this. I think it's really quite catchy.
It's like slow and doomy, but somehow melodic. And what I like about it is that a lot of these songs are driven by the low end, which is not surprising because of Peter Steele's bass, but the way that the bass and the keyboards marinate together, it's almost a very nice marriage in many ways. This was an underrated song for me. I loved it. I thought this was almost a song of the week by the end, just because even though I think the album has its problems, namely the next track, this is a really good song. And honestly, I would have ended it here. If you would have given me 60 minutes of music and ended it with Wolf Moon, I would have been like, this album is great. But then they go into Haunted, which is it's the last full-length track, and it's just so long and so repetitive, and it just lacked the melody and the hooks that a lot of the other songs had. Also very, very atmospheric sounding, and that's usually something that I like. But for whatever reason, it just was a miss on this track. And I think, again, the fatigue had set in, and I just think the album would have been better without it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with any of that. I think if they were going to keep this song on the album, maybe putting it somewhere in the middle to break up the two halves or whatever might have been a better choice. But I'm kind of with you. Like, it's I didn't think it was a bad song. I just thought maybe it was a little unnecessary, and the fact that it's so long, but it kind of drones. It's kind of a droning, drone on kind of tune. It might be my least favorite song on the album.
It is honestly. Mine, no question about it. It's just, for 10 minutes, you just went on too long, I thought.
Yeah, and this is another song. It's a mystical song about Peter's love affair with the spirit of his girlfriend. I guess this description will be better than anything we have to say about it. The slowness of the instrumentation with piano creates a haunting atmosphere, hence the title, as if the song itself was inhabited with the spirits from beyond. I guess that's a pretty decent way of putting it. And an interesting little trivia tidbit, the soundtrack to the video game Descent 2 includes an instrumental version of this song. So there you go.
There you go. Very interesting. I want to ask you, because like the album proper now ends with an 8-second outro, another spoken word track, which kind of a very lighthearted way to go out, which I guess is nice after 70 minutes of this stuff. Other than the way that the album ends, when you were done, did it grow on you during the week? I know you said the first listen was tough, but at what point did this kind of say, hey, you know what, I can kind of dig this?
Probably around the fourth time I listened to it. I think it kind of clicked where I heard a song and be like, oh yeah, that's that song I listened to earlier this week. I like this song. Like, because at first it was kind of, it was hard to kind of like separate song from song. Like, it all kind of sounded like one long run-on musical depression. Like, but the more I listened to it and the more I paid attention and kind of looked more into the lyrical themes and kind of tried to figure out how, like, where the band was coming from upon writing these songs, I think that it grew on me quite a bit, and I'm really glad that you chose it, because it's something that I don't know I would have ever listened to otherwise. But I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. So
good. I'm glad. Sometimes I try to force you to just hear things that you might not have heard. For me, the album is probably like a 7.25, a little long, but definitely appreciate some of this stuff. It makes me want to check out, other stuff by the band that I may not have heard. What are you going to give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'm going to give it a 7.0. I thought it was really good. Like, nothing that really blew me out of the water, but other than that last tune that we talked about, like, there wasn't really anything that I wouldn't even say I disliked that last song. It just was not my favorite. It was just a pretty above average journey from start to finish. And I'm glad that, again, I'm glad we got a chance to check it out, because at least now I can, now I have a sound to go with the name.
There you go.
A name of a band that I've known for many years and have known them to be a influential and important band, but just never got a chance to listen to them or understand why. And now it's like, we talked about Voyager and Devin Townsend and Porcupine Tree as all different types of bands that may or may not have, but probably were influenced by this band, and particularly this album. I would tend to think, because if what I've read is true, and that this is a little bit more of an outlier for the band, and their other stuff is actually doomier and less melodic, this actually makes sense for a Voyager or a Devin Townsend, who tend to be on the melodic side, that maybe they would have gravitated more towards a melodic Type O Negative versus a doomy Type O Negative.
All of that very, very well said. We've covered a lot of ground the last few weeks in terms of like new stuff. I'm curious to see what you're going to choose for next week. But before we do, some news items, and one of these is close to home because I know you have plans for this. But Aerosmith has announced their farewell tour, it seems, starting September 2nd in Philadelphia and going all the way through the new year. I think they finish up at the Bell Center in Montreal at the end of January. I haven't seen Aerosmith in over, I think, 25 years at this point. I know you have plans to go see this show. Were you able to get tickets, or is that tomorrow?
My plans were thwarted when I found out how much the tickets cost. So I'm not, as of now, I am not going.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Because the decent tickets were in the $300 to $400 range. And the cheapest nosebleeds were like $125.
Yeah, it's a hard pass. It's funny, they're playing UBS.
The pit tickets were $1,300.
Oh, it's just insane. It's funny because they're playing down the block from me at the UBS Arena on my birthday, but I'll be in Atlanta, so I will not be seeing the show. But
they're playing in Buffalo in January, so there's like a lot of time for me to change my mind, and if the tickets don't end up on the secondary market and go for even more money than what they're already going for, it's something I may change my mind. My sister and her fiance got tickets, so they'll be going, but there's not a lot of bands that I think I would shell out that kind of money for, and I didn't want to like go sit in a crappy seat. Like, either see it in a decent seat or don't go.
One of those bands that you might do it for is Savatage, who we've obviously talked about, but I don't know if you've heard this. Did you know that John Oliva was nearly going to sing for Black Sabbath? Have you heard this story? Because I will go into detail. This is nuts.
Literally just came across that today, as a matter of fact.
For those that haven't heard, he was interviewed by a Greek magazine, and essentially after Fight for the Rock, which in the interview he calls it Fight for the Nightmare. So right off the bat, John seems to be doing well. But no, kidding aside, after Fight for the Rock, Black Sabbath had asked him to basically audition for the band, and they even sent him the set list so that he would know what to sing. And meanwhile, as that's happening, Chris Oliva was in talks with Dave Mustaine to join Megadeth. So both of the Oliva brothers were about to go in very different, albeit big, directions. And then they kind of like were sitting across from each other, and Oliva, John, kicks Chris and was like, "What the hell are we doing, man? We're not doing this. We're going to carry on with Savatage." And carry on they did, at least until Chris's passing, a number of years later. But can you imagine if on the heels of Ozzy and Ronnie James Dio, that John Oliva would have been the singer for Black Sabbath?
I don't think it would have sounded bad. I think it would have been pretty cool.
I'm not arguing. I just I never knew about this. And we know that Dave Mustaine always picks up the greatest guitar players in the world to join his band. So,
he would take a future Savatage guitarist years later in Al Pitrelli.
That's right. You're good. It's a good point.
Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned that it was, after Fight for the Rock, because this is actually that period of time right before Paul O'Neill got his mitts on Savatage and kind of took the band into that new direction, that more almost Broadway metal style that they kind of started. That jump from Fight for the Rock to Hall of the Mountain King was such a huge improvement, and that a lot of that is Paul O'Neill's doing. I'm sure we'll probably talk. I think maybe in our 11th or 12th year of the Metal Exchange, we'll get to Fight for the Rock. It'll probably be our final Sabotage album that we
the final
cover.
podcast.
Yeah, we'll do Sabotage's new album that comes out next year, but way before we do Fight for the Rock, and it hasn't even been recorded yet.
And then one other little point I wanted to mention, just because I know people have been talking about it. Iron Maiden snubbed again for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I know people are up in arms, but fact of the matter is, when Missy Misdemeanor Elliott gets in and Iron Maiden doesn't, I've got nothing else to say. Some things just stand for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I think I did already to you. Maybe we'll save it for a bonus episode, but it's much like everything else. There's tons of politics involved, and it's stupid. And I don't know. I lost interest in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame once Rush, Pearl Jam, and Green Day all got in. And by the way, Pearl Jam and Green Day both got in the first year they were eligible, and Iron Maiden has been eligible since 2005. So
drop the mic, my friend. That's all you need to say. And no disrespect, because I think that Green Day and Pearl Jam are first ballot bands. My only argument is so is Iron Maiden.
Yeah, there's a metal bias with some of these people that are.
But Priest got in.
Yeah, and again, I think I've mentioned this in the past, but from what I understand, and I think this was an interview that somebody from Metallica, I believe, did. It's that the more bands like Judas Priest and Metallica and Kiss get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the more influence those guys have and who goes in the future. So the more, I think, over time, when we get some of the old guard out that are snobs and supposedly didn't ever want to see Kiss get in, which is insane, that Kiss wouldn't be in any Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, never mind the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I have zero doubt Iron Maiden will go in at some point, but it is ridiculous that they haven't. But at the same time, I'm not really upset about it, because nothing about it is surprising to me whatsoever.
Well said. And I guess that brings us to next week. I feel like it's been some time since you've selected an album, so I'm eagerly awaiting your pick for next week. What am I listening to?
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, because the Hellstar album was really kind of it's like a pseudo request in a lot of ways. It's been about 6 weeks since I picked an album. I had a number of things running through my head, but I want to give a shout out to our mutual friend Nick, who kind of sealed the deal for me with some texts that we received from him last night talking about Halloween. We are going to be seeing them with Nick in a couple of weeks, and I thought, it's been a while since we discussed a Halloween album. We've discussed the Halloween tribute album more recently, but then the question was, well, which album? And the album I landed on was Pink Bubbles Go Ape.
Wow.
So
I thought you were going to say Chameleon. So in a sense, I'm actually, I don't want to say more surprised. I'm more surprised, but arguably happier. So it's good.
Chameleon's coming. I at one point I did consider doing both, but I think that they deserve their own episode. Yeah, because I have a lot of thoughts on both, and I don't want to belabor it into one episode. So we'll circle back. My goal is to eventually have covered the entire Halloween discography, although they're releasing albums faster than we're releasing episodes about Halloween. So, but I think that this just it has a lot of interesting talking points as far as where the band was, the who was in the band, who had just left the band, who wrote which songs. Because this is, it's funny. I think when we both first started getting into Halloween, like these two albums were derided because they represented the kind of where Halloween went off the rails, so to speak. But I think that over time, the diehard fans have kind of softened their stance, at least on Pink Bubbles. Chameleon, I think, is a little bit more of of a reach for some diehard metal fans. I happen to love it, but it is such an out there album. One of the most disjointed Helloween album of all time,
without question.
Yeah, it's not really even close. But I thought that, this album had a lot of good stuff going on. I think that the weird album art and the title of the album and the fact that it wasn't released in the United States, there was a lot of things that I think were working
after the Keepers. Like, it was a victim of fate in many ways. It was just its own fate. But good choice. So, I look forward to this. It'll serve as a nice little not a primer, but it'll kind of wet the whistle for Helloween.
Serves a primer for the 11 songs that we will not hear them play when we see them. As much as I would love for them to bust out the chants. I
don't think that's going to happen. I think we'd have to go see Master Plan for that. But good choice. Look forward to it. For everyone out there that's listening, we thank you. Please give us a like and a follow. Tell your friends about us. And consider joining us on Patreon, because it really does help support the show in many, many ways. But at a minimum, a like and a follow goes a long way to helping others find the show. So with that said, I'm going to go look at that weird cover art. I'm probably going to go listen to Cinnamon Girl, if I'm not lying, by Neil Young. And
I'm going to go kiss a rough.
Enjoy the week, my friend. I will talk to you soon.
Yeah. Also, real quick, as far as the Patreon goes, we have a little bonus episode planned. We were talking about Savatage earlier, and we're going to do a little bonus episode where we both construct our dream set list for the Savatage reunion that's supposed to happen next year. The only limit is that it needs to be under 120 minutes, and it has to be Savatage songs.
I think we can. I think I can fill that up very fast. The question is, how do I do it, and in what order? But that being said, I think it will make for a very interesting conversation. So that'll be out before the end of the month.
Yep, I look forward to that. This is the kind of stuff that we're going to try to do a bit more of as for our patrons and as bonus content. And so yeah, that's another. I get to talk about two of my favorite bands in the same month. So nothing wrong with that.
Well, enjoy, my friend. I will look forward to catching up with you soon, and we'll talk about some Pink Bubbles Go Ape. I knew it was only a matter of time.
I feel like we have to use that Pink Bubbles Go Ape intro to intro the episode, but you'll have to stay tuned next week and find out.
Take it easy, my friend. Talk to you soon.
All right, take care.